Torah. I mean, to be engaged in the, did you let in Sydney? She's in the waiting room.
Yes, I did.
Okay. Okay. So this week we're going to talk about the Jewish women mystics, the women who were Kabbalists, and they saw spirits, they had mediums, and they were seriously, many of them, accepted by the male establishment. And they were all part of the Kabbalistic movement. So before we talk about the women, I thought we should talk a little bit about Kabbalah and the importance of Tzfat, the city of Safed or Tzfat in Israel. That was a center in the 16th century, like one of the places I was researching said, it was like a small town, as if 100 Nobel Prize winners all lived in the same town. They all lived there together, and they were geniuses, spiritual geniuses. And but Kabbalah, according to the tradition, started with this Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was part of the rebellion against the Romans around 150 BC CE. And he was hiding from the Romans, and he went into a cave. So this is, an apocryphal story. He went into a cave, and he had a revelation. It sort of reminds me of Muhammad, where, suddenly he wrote down all this information, or the Book of Mormon, where I think it was Joseph Smith, had an angel dictate. Well, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai had this vision, and he was receiving all of this mystical information, which is the word Kabbalah means to receive, from lekabel, the Hebrew. So it was his receiving of this mystical treaty and teaching, and he wrote it down in a book called Zohar, which comes from the word shining or bright. So the Zohar is the original text of Kabbalah. So then this Zohar was secret information. In fact, in the Talmud, it says that you should not study Kabbalah. First of all, only a man should study Kabbalah. But you should have studied everything else, the Torah and the Talmud, everything completely. You should be married with children, and then you could study Kabbalah, because you could lose your mind, was the idea. You could lose your mind. And they talk about, in the Talmud, these four rabbis. So there were other Kabbalists or mystics at the time, one of them being Rabbi Akiba. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about Rachel, his wife, who sold her hair and supported him for 24 years so he could become a great scholar. But there's this little paragraph in the Talmud that says 4 men went into the, the orchard. But the word is pardes in Hebrew. Pardes is also the word, it comes from, not sure, Latin or whatever, for paradise. The orchard literally was, what they did, they fasted, they took drugs, they meditated, and they literally, it says all their minds went up to the heights of the heavenly realms. That's the Pardes. It's another word for the next world. And of the 4 of them, one killed himself, one lost his mind, one left Judaism, and one came back normally, and that was Rabbi Akiba. And it was kind of saying that if you're not grounded in the real material world, you can't comprehend Kabbalah. It will drive you crazy. So that was the idea. So why am I saying this? So for centuries, small groups of men studied Kabbalah in secret. It was secret information. And, even in our lifetime, Kabbalah only became known to people, maybe in the 60s, 70s. It was the secret information that was transmitted from one generation to another to these Kabbalistic scholars. And many of them lived in Spain. They were Sephardic scholars in Spain. And when the Spanish Inquisition came and the expulsion, many of them went to Israel, to Palestine, as it was called. It was ruled by the Ottomans at that time, and it was a Muslim country, but they went to the city of Safat in the north. If you've been there, you know it's very beautiful on a hill and kind of mystical and whatever. And they all got there and they studied Kabbalah and they started teaching it and they started expanding the knowledge. Now, I want to share some information with you at this point. So hold on, I've just learned how to share, and it's Kabbalah and Safed. And then how do I share this?
So you make sure you push share screen on the bottom of your Zoom window.
Oh yeah, wait a minute, hold on. Share screen.
And then select the document you want to start sharing first.
Okay, and then it's this one. So, but I don't see anybody.
You will once it starts. They should appear like either on the side or on the top.
They're not. So let me try this again. Let me go back to everybody. Share screen. Okay, now it came out. And it's Kabbalah and Safat. So now I touched it. And now do I say do share screen again?
Yeah.
Hello. Oh, share here.
Yeah, hit share. Yes, now there you go.
Okay. So if we go down to the scholars, if you see where my my little cursor is, oh, you can invite Joe. You can and let Joella come in.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So here we go. I'm going to move you over here so you can all see this. Okay. So here's all the people who were there. In Savad, Moses Cordovero, he offered a commentary on the Zohar. So here was an explanation of the Zohar. Joseph Caro wrote the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch is an unbelievable book that basically takes lists every single mitzvah in the Torah and the Talmud and the rulings on it. You could look it up by topic. So like if you say, I want to look up the topic of marriage, you go to marriage and it's all listed, all the laws. So it was an amazing book that he put together there. And it was the place that Rabbi Isaac, and I'm going to move you over here. If you see right here, Rabbi Isaac Luria came to Safed, and he was called the Ari, which means the lion, because he was so mystical and brilliant. And he expanded the Kabbalistic study to new heights, and he died young. And Lurianic Kabbalah for Rabbi Luria is what we still study today. So that I'm going to move you over here. And Miriam, you can admit Miriam. So also, I want to explain what he taught. But he had a follower named Chaim Vital. And the reason he's important is because Chaim Vital, and we're going to see short in a few minutes, in his diaries, he talks about the women Kabbalists, the most famous woman Kabbalist. She's written up in his diaries. So we know about Vital, and we'll know about this woman that we're going to read about in a few minutes from Chaim Vital. So what is the idea of Lurianic Kabbalah? It's complicated, but it was an idea about explaining evil and good in the world and how to reclaim the good and to extinguish the evil in the world. And Gershom Sholem, who is an incredible scholar of Kabbalah, he lived in the 20th century, wrote an amazing book about Kabbalah, says that Kabbalah, or this Lurianic Kabbalah, resulted because of the Inquisition and the terrible pogroms and the Crusades and all of the terrible things that were happening to the Jews. It was a response of how to respond to all of this evil and disaster. And the Kabbalists came up with a spiritual understanding of what was happening and how we ourselves could change the outcome by the way we behave. Does anybody have any questions or anything so far about anything I've said? Okay, because we're going to get to the women in a second, but the idea of the yes.
I have a question.
Of course.
They could change the outcome by what they did or by the way they prayed.
What they did, which was to every mitzvah brought light into the world. even the most smallest ritual, you were either supporting evil or by not doing them, or you were creating light in the world and gathering the broken vessels, which I'll talk about.
Okay.
It. I'll show you. So his
Okay.
idea was the way the world was created was that God, which filled creation, did this thing called Tzimtzum, which means like held God's breath so that there was space, because God filled the universe. God had to make space for the creation of the world. So he pulled back. That's called Tzimtzum, pulling back, and he created this empty space where creation could happen. And what happened was it created kind of an exile. So the empty space, they're saying, is a void of God, because there's an empty space. And so God created this right here. If you look at where I'm putting this, if somebody would like to read this, it would be great instead of me talking the whole time. Would somebody like to read right here after the Tzimtzum? Somebody like to read?
I have a question too. I think this is a really nice synopsis that you have here. Where did you get this, and are you giving this to us?
I'll send it to you. I just found it like 15 minutes ago. My Jewish learning, because I realized I wanted to do this first.
Yeah.
I use often My Jewish Learning. They have amazing, simple, but detailed explanations. So if you look up My Jewish Learning in Safed or Kabbalah and Safed, you will find it. That's
Yes, I like that
a
too.
lot of my places. Okay,
Okay.
so Nadine, you wanted to read.
Okay. After the Tzimtzum, a stream of divine light flowed from the Godhead into the empty space the Almighty had created, taking the shape of the Sephirot and Adam. Is it Kadmon?
Adam Kadmon.
Primal man. Kadmon, primal man.
Okay, so
The light
Sefirot,
flowed.
1 second. The Sefirot are these attributes of God that I guess had some kind of shape. And Adam Kadmon was like the idea of an archetype of the original human, an archetype though. Go ahead.
The light flowed from Adam Kadmon out of his eyes, nose, mouth, creating the vessels that were eternal shapes of the Sephirot. But the vessels were too fragile to contain such a powerful divine light. The upper 3 vessels were damaged, and the lower 7 were shattered and fell. Thus, the Tehiru became...
Okay, so the Tehiru is that void, the void.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thus, the Tehiru became divided into the upper and lower worlds, a product of the Shivara shattering. And so evil came into the world through a violent separation between those elements that had taken part in the act of creation and others that had willfully resisted, contributing to the shattering of the vessels. The elements that had fought against the creation were the nascent powers of evil, but because they opposed creation, they lack the power to survive. They need access to the divine light and continue to exist in the world only to the extent that they can gather the holy sparks that fell when the Shivara took place.
Okay, how complex is this? When you think about how they came up with this idea that God made a space to create the world, the universe, and or the earth, the universe, whatever they thought that was, and that he was pouring divine light into these vessels, and they shattered. And so the ones that shattered there's light, but the broken pieces are collecting the light also, and that's the evil. If the evil gets the light, evil proliferates. But if we get the light and we can return it, then good proliferates. So like Susan, why don't you read this? The genius.
The genius of Lurianic Kabbalah is the way in which it unites Jewish mysticism and Jewish ethics. That unification occurs here in the conception of the way in which mankind can undo the damage done in the creation, can repair the Shivara through tikkun olam, repairing the world. For Luria and his followers, tikkun had a very specific meaning. Every time that a human performs a mitzvah or commandment, she raises one of the holy sparks out of the hands of the forces of evil and restores it to the upper world. Conversely, every time that a human sins, a divine spark plunges down. The day will come, if all do their part, when the entire remaining supply of divine light will be restored to the upper world. Without access to the divine light, evil will be unable to survive and will crumble away to dust.
So, okay, so every time you do a mitzvah, and if you go down, I don't want to read the rest, but it says, ethical behavior following the mitzvah, no matter how trivial, takes on a new cosmic significance. Forget to say the motzi, you've contributed to universal evil. Put up a mezuzah, you've helped redeem the entire world. So their idea, and this really is part of Hasidic thought as well. Hasidic thought also believes in, like, when you're building goodness, that every mitzvah has huge significance, and that's why you want to follow as many as possible. So this is the idea of Kabbalah. So just so we have a sense of what it means and how everything you do either builds or destroys the world. That's why, and we talk about tikkun olam in modern times as, you know, helping people, repairing actual literal things that need repair. But they saw that tikkun olam, which just means repairing the world, is in everything. Lighting Shabbat candles, you know, saying a blessing, anything you do, studying this, what we're doing, studying Torah, this is tikkun olam as well, Jewish learning. So that's how they approach their lives. Any questions or comments or anything about it? Okay, so now we want to look at some of the women who were instrumental in this. So, okay, now Hannah, what do I have to close this first?
Yeah, I closed this one, and so you can stop sharing this and do it again for the next document.
Okay, I don't know how I stop share. Oh, stop share.
Yeah.
Okay, stop share. Hi, everyone. Now I'm going to share the women. Okay, so there, first I want to talk about a woman. Okay, I'll talk about the women in Tzfat first. All right, share, where do I say share here? Okay, so the Jewish, all right, so we don't have to go into the introduction about it that they came, but there actually were some mystical women in Spain. Either we only know of one. So of course the records are very sketchy, except for this one Insafid, Francesca Sarah, who was quite well known, and we're going to talk about in a second. But we look here, there was, it says in inquisitorial records, meaning they were part of the Inquisition. So who knows, maybe they were burned at the stake. Maybe they were exiled. I don't know. From medieval Spain records numerous cases of female Jewish prophets. So, you know, it's amazing how little is written, and yet women were quite mystical and they were respected. So we're looking at a transition from last week and the week before, where the women were brought down for their genius, for their talent, for their intelligence, and starting to be respected and honored and accepted in these mystical circles, because what they had was so unique. It was like awesome. So they accepted it. So here, foremost among them was a young girl, Inez of Harara. Inez told her many followers of her ascents to heaven, guided by angels. In the words of one inquisitorial witness. So I think she must have been on trial,
Yeah.
you know, and maybe burned. She saw purgatory and the souls who suffered there, and also how in another department, others sat with honor upon golden thrones. Inez and other prophetic women of her time led gatherings that included throngs of followers who engaged in ecstatic dancing, song, mystical marriages, and calls for fasting and repentance. This is extreme. this is really out there. And it's similar to, I would say, Christian women mystics. It doesn't seem that different from that time. Those are the various, and maybe Muslim women mystics. They all seem to have that same, see God, well, also Kabbalah. The whole point of Kabbalah is to better understand God. So she saw purgatory and souls. She saw hell. She was Jewish, but it seems like what she saw was very similar to Christian and perhaps, I don't even know, Muslim visions of the afterlife and of angels and all this stuff. So, but there's a record of her. Now we get to this woman, Francesca Sarah, who I would have loved to have known. Okay, so I would like somebody to read this and we'll talk about it. Who would like to read this? I have a lot more people on the, who would like to read? Nan, you want to read? Francesca Sarah.
Francesca Sarah. During the Renaissance of Jewish mysticism that took place in the Galilean town of Safat in the mid-16th century, there is evidence of a number of mystically active Jewish women. The
hagiographic literature.
Hagiographic literature describing the luminaries of the period.
Let me just say, hagiographic means like turning them into saints, really venerating them and praising them and, making them ideals. Go ahead.
Including Rabbi Isaac Luria and Hayim Vital, including stories about a woman named Francesca Sarah. This woman is also mentioned in Vital's mystical diary, the Book of Visions.
So here's this woman, and she was an equal, or a companion, a colleague of Isaac Luria, who wrote Lurianic Kabbalah, and Chaim Vital, who wrote everything down that Luria was teaching and wrote his own book, the Book of Visions. Okay, keep going.
Much is known about Francesca Sarah, who was thought to have had prophetic abilities and was a dream interpreter. After dreaming that all of Zvat's, is that right?
That's Safed in Hebrew.
Safed, okay, would be destroyed by earthquakes and plagues, the rabbis coordinated a 3-day community-wide fast, which was followed by another dream that Hashem had accepted their teshuvah.
So what's significant? Wait, what happened? Oh, yeah. What's significant is that they listened to her. She had a vision. I see that we're going to be destroyed by, earthquakes and plagues, and we must fast. And nobody said, you're crazy, you're a woman. What are you talking about? They took her seriously, and they had they fasted for 3 days, and then it didn't happen. So whether her vision was real or not, I don't think that's important. Perhaps it was, but what's important here is that they respected her vision to completely do this fast. Okay. Who else would like to read? Somebody, or any questions or comments or anything about this?
No, Thursday's fine. No, this is Stephanie's key thing. It's not mine.
Wait, is that somebody talking? No. Okay. Would somebody like to read? Somebody else? Jeff. Okay. You're muted, Jeff. Jeff, you're muted. You're still muted. Okay.
There we go. In this, Francesca's authority was equal to that of the men. This versatile woman was well-versed in Zohar and Torah and gave classes in the Mechitza to men.
Behind the Mechitza, meaning that she was on one side of the divider and the men were on the other, but she still taught them with the divider between them for modesty. Go ahead.
There were many possibilities for women at that time. The fellowship was quite concerned with the status of women. Even the smallest details of conversations between a couple was thought to have deep Kabbalistic meaning. The Kabbalah as a whole is a deeply gendered system of thought.
Yes, so there's a lot of feminine and masculine ideas in Kabbalah. The idea that Shekhinah is feminine and that God, other names for God, is masculine, and that on Shabbat they have a marriage or a consummation, is this idea. Also the idea that Shabbat is a woman and a bride, a queen and a bride comes out of the Kabbalists. The Lecha Dodi that was written by the Kabbalist Shlomo Alkabetz, who was in Sfat at this time. Come, my beloved, let us go out to greet the bride, where they would all dress up in white like grooms and go out to the fields or to the sunset, and welcome in the Shabbat bride or the Shabbat queen. She had both names or both identities, so that there was a lot of powerful feminine identity in Kabbalah. And you see, they called it the fellowship. So the mystics were part of this chevra or chavruta, this group where they were very close, and they studied together and they meditated and prayed and did everything together. And women were equal here. Okay. And she even taught men. Think about this compared to Bruria, who they had to bring down and have her commit suicide because she was so smart in the Talmudic age. And here Francesca Sarah is teaching men, and no problem. Any question? Miriam, you're muted, Miriam.
I just wanted you to explain to me what it means. I'm understanding the English and I'm reading it as a whole. It's the last sentence of the paragraph that Jeff just read. As a whole is a deeply gendered system of thought.
Meaning
now that is a positive, not a negative statement.
Positive.
Okay, so I don't know what deeply gendered system means.
It means that there are masculine and feminine attributes, that the feminine of Shabbat, of the divine presence, and therefore of women, was respected and accepted as part of Judaism and of Kabbalah. That the female aspect of God and different parts of Judaism were as respected as the male. That's what it means. It means that there were female and male attributes to many things in Judaism. Does that help?
At that time, in I think 1500s, they were way ahead of how the Haredim feel today.
Completely.
In 2021, these people, hundreds of years before them, were way ahead of their thinking.
That's right. They were. And they came from Spain. They were Sephardic. And Sephardic was different, very different, in their view of many things. But they were mystics. You know what I mean? They probably saw everybody as a soul and not a body. I would imagine you were your soul and your body was, yes, had some part of it, but they had a great respect for the feminine in general. This group, this small, highly intelligent, highly spiritual group were like that. Yes, you're right.
There's a direct warning in the Torah about those who pose as seers and oracles and offer prophecy with no result.
Right.
And you wonder, this is very, very close to that definition of what not to espouse or believe in. The fact that these people had visions, that they had, quotes, prophetic characteristics, and yet the warning still exists that these are false.
But there were real prophets. She was, obviously they thought of her as not a false prophet. I mean, we have prophets too. So, and we even have a woman prophet, Huldah, that King Josiah consulted, about the future based on when they found the 5th book in the temples. So there were prophets and there were women prophets. And we know Miriam was considered a prophet, and there were other prophets, Deborah. So you're right. No false prophets. And they really said sorcerers. The word was sorcerer, right, more than prophets. So, but yeah, everybody makes it work for them. So I'm not going to argue with you. So, okay. She also, did they say about it? She had she was a medium. She had like an angelic spirit that spoke through her, according to the writings, which we'll see about. But who else would like to read? Miriam, you want to read?
Sure. According to Vital's diary, Francesca, not Francesca. It says Francesca.
Supposed to be Francesca. I misspelled it.
Oh, okay. Francesca Sarah was present in the study hall when he lectured on Jewish mysticism in the late 16th century. He described her as a pious woman who sees visions while awake and hears a voice speaking to her. Most of her pronouncements are true.
So she was like a psychic, or she was connected to a spirit, they called it, that spoke to her, and that she would, she was a very venerated mystic in these times. And for Vital to write about her and honor her, and that she was allowed to study with the men, they had to really take her seriously. Okay, so here's Joseph Sambari in his History of the Jews Under Muslim Rule, written in the mid-17th century, describes Francesca Sarah as a woman wise and great in her deeds. She had a magid, that's the word, an angelic medium, speak to her to inform her of what was to be in the world. The sages of Safed tested her several times to know if there was substance to her words, and everything she said came to pass. So she had a magid. The word magid is like the same word as Haggadah, means to tell, someone to tell. She had an angelic medium, and they tested her. So this is pretty interesting, because how suspicious are all of us of people who have mediums? I don't know, some of you may believe in mediums. It's very hard, but these sages believed in her. So she was pretty amazing for her time. In one instance, okay, this is the fast, because this is like a second source, but this is something more. In one instance, she sent for the sages, warning them that unless they declared a fast day, prayed, and gave charity, they would perish in a plague. The rabbis heeded her and immediately decreed a fast. When everyone was gathered on the fast day and one of the rabbis rose to speak, she received a revelation that he would die in 8 days as atonement for the sins of the congregation. Exactly 8 days later, he passed away. One Safed scholar, although skeptical of her powers, consulted her as to whether he would succeed in a certain endeavor. Upon recognizing the veracity of her vision, he bowed low in homage to God, who imparted of his wisdom to such a woman of valor. So, wow, Francesca Sarah was, do would know of any other women like this in history? I'm trying, not just in Jewish history. Do we know of any at all like this? Does anybody?
I don't know much about Joan of Arc, but she was revered. Other than that, I don't know.
Right. She heard voices as well. So
Yeah.
what do we think about Francesca Sarah? Do we admire her? Do we think she's crazy? Do we believe? What do you think about her? Any opinions? No one has any opinions about her? Joella, do you have an opinion?
Sorry, I was yelling at my dog to stop.
It's okay. It's okay. Nadine, Joella, what do you think?
I personally have a hard time believing the whole visions part, but I think it's amazing that she was still so revered in this time where women weren't necessarily either taken seriously or in powers or in positions of power. So I think it's really cool that they just kind of trust her in this way, or at least that's how it seems to me. So
I agree. I actually love her. I'm so happy that she exists. I'm so happy that a woman like this exists in that time, that all these Kabbalists, and you never hear of her. but she was quite influential. And that's the thing. I mean, people talk about, let's ask some of the male rabbis and the ones who even teach Kabbalah, if they know about Francesca Sarah. And if they do, how come they don't teach about her? Any other thoughts about Francesca? Yes, Nadine.
I think you have to admire her. I mean, she had a certain amount of power. She was kind of an ancient influencer, if you want to look at it that way.
Right.
But yeah, she got the power, whether she one way or another. So
anyone else?
I'm impressed that the men respected her.
There's no backstory. No woman of that time could have had any influence whatsoever unless she came from an influential family or had a background from the family that allowed her access to even entry into the study with men. So there's a lot missing in the background of this woman that she could even have been given attention. And it just didn't happen at that time that women could stand up for themselves without having a platform established for her to have a voice.
Well, you say
so something is missing.
You say that, but earlier we read, or I have read, that in Sfat, the women were as literate as the men. This was a fellowship. This was its own private society, not like other places.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you're right in most places, though I do want to get to this other woman who was a rabbi in Iraq at this time, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But I do want to mention just Fioretta of Modena, who was much more of what it's more typical, which is that she was a scholarly woman, but she educated her grandson. You know what I mean? She devoted herself to teaching her. She knew Torah and Talmud and Halacha and Maimonides and Zohar, and she studied it, but her whole thing was to make her grandson a great rabbi. Yes.
Susan, yes. Before we get on to her, I think what's missing here is the community of men. We're also focused on the woman and how she did, but what about the men who were accepting her?
Well, I talked about them. They were the
great so couple. I mean, we have you absolutely did, but I think we have to give them credit too.
Oh, you're right.
This, I mean, we always just look for women, and what about the community of men that were around her? And I think that's something to be said there too.
Well, I agree. I think that the Kabbalists, was this, there was Luria, there was Vital, there was Shlomo Alkabetz, there was Joseph Cairo. There were all of these brilliant men. And Sephardic, I just want to add that because I get the impression that in the Sephardic world, women had a little more power, or I'm not saying equality, of course, or there was more education for daughters or something, it seems. And you're right, but she must have stood out and been extraordinary.
Right.
But the fact that they fasted, she said things and they didn't believe her and they tested her and then they said, okay, she's the real deal. And they were so prominent, gives her a lot of credibility, in my opinion. So I just wanted to talk about, this Fioretta for a minute, just that she was a brilliant woman also, but in a more typical way, she didn't see a place for herself. So she devoted it to her grandson, who became a great, great rabbi. And here's one more person I found there's Inez again, but up here, a daughter of Rav Raphael Anav. They don't know her name, but there's a documentation in Damascus in 1609 that she was an oracle to the entire Jewish community, was consulted and obeyed by its leading rabbinic figures. So, and the spiritual advisor of her was another woman named Rachel Aberlin, and she saw visions of Elijah the prophet and was seeing visions, demons, souls, and angels. Now, they all have to be credulous. I mean, everybody has to believe in visions, demons, angels in order to accept these women. So the men all this had to be a society where that was taken for granted as real. So we have to start with that place. Like if we're not in that place, we're going to be skeptical, but obviously they all believed in that stuff. There was a lot of superstition. I want to share like one more because we have like 15 minutes and she is fantastic. And just, okay, now wait, stop share for 1 minute. This woman was Oznat Barzani, really just recently discovered her, and she lived in Mosul, Iraq, and her father ran a yeshiva, and he died, and she married a yeshiva scholar, a rabbi who was supposed to take over the yeshiva, but he was too busy studying Torah, and she had been raised her whole life studying, so she took over the yeshiva, and she ran it. So I want to share this with you because it's first woman rabbi. Okay. The first woman rabbi, Oznat Barzani, she lived from 1590 to 1670, was a renowned Kurdish Jewish woman who lived in Iraq. And she was, you know, Hebrew, Torah, Talmud, Midrash, and Kabbalah. So this was, and they have her diaries as well. And what they say about her, that if you look here, well, let's read some of this, but she writes about how she told her father she wanted to study, and she said, I don't ever want to do housework. And he said, okay, you won't have to. She never did housework.
Yeah.
In the 1600s.
That's for being a rabbi.
Okay. So she's considered the first female rabbi of Jewish history by some scholars, as the first record of Jewish women. So she, like the Kurdish Jewish, we don't know much about that. So who would like to read some of this? It's really interesting.
I'll read some.
Okay.
Barzani was the daughter of Rabbi Samuel ben Nathaniel Levi Barzani, a rabbinic scholar whose authority was absolute, though he held no official position. He had founded several yeshivot and was head of the yeshiva in Mosul. He lived in great poverty, but was regarded as a saint. He had no sons, and he was his daughter's primary teacher. A master of Kabbalah, he was said to have taught his daughter the secrets of Kabbalah. Barzani adored her father and regarded him as a king of Israel. In a letter, she described her upbringing. I never left the entrance to my house or went outside. I was like a princess of Israel. I grew up on the laps of scholars, anchored to my father's blessed memory. I was never taught any work but sacred study.
So she did no housework. She did nothing. And here it says, Barzani was married to one of her father's best students and nephew, her cousin, Rabbi Jacob Mizrahi, who promised her father she would do no domestic work and could spend her time as a Torah scholar. Okay. So that's pretty incredible. So she was, you know, a highly venerated scholar in Mosul, Iraq. And says he was so involved in studies that she essentially taught the yeshiva students and provided them with rabbinic training. So she was training all the rabbinical students. And following her husband's death, the leadership of the yeshiva passed to her naturally, and she became known as the chief teacher of Torah. And she was a big fundraiser. She also she went around and raised money, and she taught. Okay, so she ran this yeshiva, her few extant writings demonstrated complete mastery of Hebrew, Torah, Talmud, Midrash, as well as Kabbalah. And her letters are not erudite, but also lyrical. Okay, they gave her the title of Ta'anit, not rabbi, but a Tana is a highly regarded Talmudic scholar, like Rabbi Akiva was a Tana. A Tana is a very high honor to be a Tana. Mora is for the Gemara, and a Tana is for the Mishnah. And so this was a rare honor for her. Okay, now they say that she performed miracles. And there's this amazing story about her. It's probably, of course, it's a legend, but this is how much she was venerated, that they created legends about her, that she was a miracle maker. So basically what it was, and we'll read part of it, but first of all, her father appeared in her dreams and telling her dangers and how to avert them. And so there was a celebration outside for Rosh Chodesh. Well, I read a little more of this. They were supposed to have a celebration inside the synagogue, and she said, let's do it outside. It's a beautiful night and the moon, and it's Rosh Chodesh. So they were outside, and the synagogue was set on fire. It became on fire. So let's read this part as they proceeded the celebration. This is like the story about Oznat. So who would like to read? Who's down there that I haven't?
I'll go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
As they proceeded with the celebration, there were shouts and they saw flames shoot up into the sky. The synagogue had been set on fire with all the sacred books and scrolls in it. After Barzani whispered a secret name she had learned from her father, the people saw a flock of angels descending to the roof of the synagogue. The angels beat the flames with their wings until every last spark had been put out. Then they rose up into the heavens like a flock of white doves and were gone. And when the smoke cleared, everybody saw that not only none of the Jews had been hurt since the congregation had been outdoors, but that another miracle had taken place. The synagogue had not burned, nor were any of the Torah scrolls touched by the flames. After that miracle, the Jews of Al-Medi were not harassed by the Gentiles for a long time. Gratefully, they renamed the synagogue after her, and the legend ends with the words, and it is still standing today.
So they named a synagogue for her. They say that, she had angels come and beat out the fire with her wings. And I guess there is a synagogue. I don't know anymore in Mosul if there are any synagogues, but for hundreds of years, there was a synagogue named for a woman who ran a yeshiva, who raised money, who never had to do housework. And we don't know about these women that they really, when they were allowed to, they could rise to the same heights as men. And of course, now we're still hoping for that. But in these small communities, and again, interestingly, they're in Sephardic cultures, which I was not aware of. There is one woman that we'll read about next week who was a Hasidic Rebbe. She became a Hasidic Rebbe. There was one, and she went to Tzfat also, but this is in the 19th century. But she's the only one. But we see there were a number of women in the Sephardic world, in Spain, in Iraq, and in Tzfat, in Safed, who were accepted by men who were allowed to realize their potential. We're all at different levels of talent, but these women were allowed, as opposed to earlier Jewish women who were felt threatening in these circles. And I'm not saying that it stayed this way, because as Miriam said, the Haredi and ultra-Orthodox did not, separated the women quite strongly from the men and didn't allow them any ability to study Talmud, Midrash, Torah, and Kabbalah. So are there any questions or comments about?
I do. I have a question.
Yes.
Francesca and what's this lady's first name again? Barzani.
Oznat?
No, Barzani.
Oh, yeah, Oznat Barzani.
Oh, Oznat. Okay, that was the name of Joseph's wife, wasn't it? Oznat.
Yeah.
I think so, in jail. At any rate, what would we do today if a brilliant woman was among us, known because of her tremendous wisdom and knowledge, and especially study? And then she said she heard voices that were helping her, like Francesca did, and that she might even have said, God spoke to me, etc. Now, what do we do today with such a human being? Do we call them schizophrenic and make sure, I'm quite serious, and make sure that they're in an institution, or do we let them be? Do we personally believe them? And still, we can disbelieve them, but not necessarily institutionalize them. So we need to face that question today as though it were real and as though it could actually happen, and how much easier it was for them to promote Oznat because, and to promote her to actually be the head of a yeshiva or the head of many yeshivas, because what she said made so much sense to her, and she never left reality. So she never put us in a position to begin to test our normalcy or abnormalcy. And so I'm bringing up these points just because they occur to me. Not that I'm going to find answers, not that I need to find any answers. I don't. I just need to bring them up because I find them interesting.
I think they're very interesting, and I'm curious what people would say. The only thing I'll say is that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Menachem Schneerson, was known to be able to predict or prophesy or see the future. He's a man, and he was, venerated, and people, dignitaries and non-Jews and all kinds of people went to visit him. But I think you're right. Well, how would we treat a woman today, like Francesca Sarah, for example, or Oznat Barzani, who did say she had dreams and did have premonitions and did warn and, perhaps perform miracles. So what do you think? How would, yes, Stephanie.
Well, I think something you said before, if she's in a time and place where the possibility of such a thing is more accepted. They were living in times that weren't as scientifically grounded. One's life expectancy was short anyway. Something about being a prophet is having a little insight just seconds before the rest of humanity surrounding you. And her group was open to it in the sense that they needed something to believe in. Hope springs eternal for positive views and visions, things that will help you cope with the future. So call it susceptibility or call it community, psychosis, like the belief that tomorrow will happen again. And you got the formula for a belief system that in a closed system of people.
So we couldn't say it was divine revelation or true connection with God or messages from the next world. We wouldn't say that.
We could if we were all, in agreement that such a thing is possible and that we don't know everything. Okay. We don't, So I'm just saying, if you've got it's a matter of the collective consciousness, what they'll be open to. Don't you think? Don't you think it runs in waves?
Well, I have an opinion, but I want to hear what other people have to say. Thank you, though.
Today we would call that a cult, a commune of collective belief, which may or may not be positive or may be very strongly negative in their attitudes toward the rest of society, an isolationist cult. These yeshivas were more like cults.
Okay,
they had a central core only.
Is it a cult to think somebody was crucified on a cross and then 3 days later rose from the dead and appeared to people?
Yes.
It's a cult? Millions.
It could be called that.
I'm just saying
or group psychosis.
It's a pretty big group.
Yeah, well.
Psychosis is pretty strong. I liked Stephanie's explanation very much. And I think we're in a different age, a more scientific age, too, where we always want Aristotelian proof of everything. And we are less likely, at least, to give credence to exceptional kind of beliefs or spiritual kind of beliefs. We're fighting for some spirituality today. So I really like Stephanie's.
But let me ask you something. Do we lose something by always looking for Aristotelian proof in life?
I think so. Because not everything is provable by measurements, but we've come to, I have friends who say, how could you be smart? Or how could you believe in, the other one is believe in science. If you're a scientist, how could you believe in religion or spirituality? And I hear that all the time. And I don't think they're mutually exclusive.
Excuse me, can I say a word?
Yes.
Okay. We are exactly living in that time at this very moment. Because, and I don't mean to be political, please don't take it as political. Some 70 million of us are believing a man who says this is the truth. And even though 3 times they recounted one state, after he got the last decision, he said, it's wrong. I won that state by a landslide. He says it today at this very moment. That's shocking enough. What's more shocking is the amount of people in the millions that truly believe.
So,
That's political. I wasn't speaking of the.
but it's not political. What she's saying is that
We're not political at all.
credulousness of people or credibility, credulousness or taking things against facts, you know, is still very appealing and possible in huge groups of people that, and we could talk about all kinds of, you know, beliefs that are irrational that people cling to. But I think, but somebody, it's interesting when it's somebody who's speaking for God or even speaking for good or speaking for some inconvenience, a lot of people don't want to hear it. You know, I think of Al Gore and as a prophet in a way who was talking, you know, 20 years ago about climate change, about all this stuff, and nobody wanted to hear it. It's as typical of prophets in the Bible all the time. They come and tell you something and nobody wants to listen to them. And then it happens. And then, you know, it's so, but I love Miriam's question of how would we treat these women today? And how it, I mean, they were prophesying for the good, for saving people, for holiness, really. And we have to give credit to the societies that were open enough to listen, or, I mean, they tested her and she seemed to come through. I mean, it's not like they just believed her right away. Merle, and then Stephanie.
Oh, I'm listening to all this thinking, when I think of cult behavior, I look at a society that is more damaging.
Yeah.
I think of these women and the fact that the men, especially in Spot, respected her, or respected them wherever they happen to have been, then obviously I think these men were of a society looking for answers to something that they couldn't figure out. And if these women were figuring it out, they respected it. And I think that's what led to the eventuality of women in the rabbinate.
Yeah, could be.
Mean, a long time ago, obviously, but I think one thing leads to another, and that's where I don't want to look at it as a cult, because when I see cult behavior, I get worried of people's involvement in it.
Right.
No, I agree with you. And I just want to add that I think it's still very notable that it's in these, not in the Ashkenazi world, but in a Muslim dominated country, which was, you know, Iraq. And even Spot was under, you know, Muslim rule. They basically left the Jews alone, is the impression you get to. If they paid this tax, they could do what they, you know, practice. But that they were open, or maybe sometimes persecution or whatever, you just go where the wisdom is and you don't think about it, or they identified with each other more than they saw differences. But Stephanie, what did you want to say?
It was a joke. I remember Lily Tomlin in her comedy routine said, why when we talk to God, it's called prayer, and when God talks to us, it's called schizophrenia.
Yeah.
Very good point. Well, thank you so much. This is great to think of. Here are these women who are examples for us of, you know, a spiritual path we can take, and just the acceptance. We see things are slowly changing in the Jewish world, and we'll continue to look forward and see. I'm going in a sort of a chronological order. So next week, we're going to talk about the Hasidic world, and where is there any room for any kind of women leadership in that world. So I want to wish you a great week, and I'll see you next week.
Looking
Thank
at
you.
looking at
Great.
this screen, Rabbi, I see a lot of saintly women because there isn't one of them who wants to do housework.
Include me in that.
If that was the only request of a saintly woman, I'd be a little skeptical of them myself. So
See, okay, well, bye, everyone.
Thank you. It was a wonderful session. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
But thank
Great.
you.
Connie, stay on for a moment.
Thank you.
bye-bye, everyone.
Connie, unmute yourself.